Your grandmother kept a kitchen that doubled as a pharmacy. Dried herbs in coffee tins, roots in paper bags, tinctures in old jam jars lined along the windowsill. She never called it medicine. She called it knowing. Number 7 on this list. Stops bleeding faster than anything on a pharmacy shelf. Number 14 was removed from official medicine not because it failed, but because it could not be patented. These are 25 of the remedies she knew. Number 25. Yarrow. Every grandmother who kept a kitchen garden kept yarrow, even if she did not always know its name. She called it the nosebleed plant, or old man's pepper, or soldier's woundwort, depending on where her people came from. The instruction was the same everywhere. When someone cut themselves and the bleeding would not stop, you grabbed a handful of yarrow leaves, crushed them, and pressed them hard into the wound. The bleeding slowed within minutes. Roman soldiers carried it into every campaign for over 400 years for exactly this reason. A 2021 clinical trial published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology confirmed that yarrow compresses reduced wound bleeding time by 47% through a compound called achillin that directly triggers platelet aggregation. Your grandmother did not know what achillin was. She knew the bleeding stopped. Number 24. Elderberry. Every fall, grandmothers who knew watched the creek banks and fence rows for the heavy, dark clusters of elderberries that meant the winter medicine was ready. They simmered the berries slowly with raw honey, sometimes a cinnamon stick, for an hour. They strained the liquid, bottled it, and stored it in the cool of the cellar. Give a tablespoon at the first sign of fever, and a tablespoon every few hours after that. The syrup tasted good enough that children did not refuse it. Modern research has confirmed that compounds in elderberry block the neuraminidase enzyme that influenza viruses use to replicate and spread through the body. It is the same mechanism targeted by Tamiflu, which costs $150 for a course. A quart of elderberry syrup costs under $5 to make. The medicine your grandmother put in mason jars was working the same way as the prescription the doctor writes today. Number 23. Plantain leaf, not the banana. The broad-ribbed weed that grows in every trampled yard, every cracked sidewalk, every packed dirt path in America. Early settlers called it white man's footprint because it appeared everywhere people walked. They brought it on purpose. They needed it. When a child stepped barefoot on a yellow jacket nest, when a splinter went deep and turned hot and red by morning, the response was the same in almost every American household through the middle of the last century. Find a plantain leaf, chew it briefly to break the cells, and press the mass directly on the wound. The swelling came down. The redness pulled back. Modern herbalists have since confirmed that plantain contains allantoin, the same compound found in wound healing creams that sell for $12 a tube at the pharmacy. Your grandmother had it growing in the dirt beside the back steps and never thought of it as anything remarkable. It was just what you used. Number 22. Stinging nettle. The plant that burns like fire when you brush against it bare-legged becomes something entirely different when you dry it and brew it. Grandmothers who used it called it a blood builder and a spring tonic. After months of winter eating, heavy preserved food, and almost no fresh greens, they brewed nettle into a daily tea and gave it to everyone in the household who looked pale or tired. 3 cups of nettle infusion delivers more bioavailable calcium than a glass of milk, more iron than cooked spinach, and more vitamin K than a full serving of kale. A study from the University of Maryland Medical Center found that freeze-dried nettle reduced allergy symptoms by 58% in the treatment group, performing comparably to over-the-counter antihistamines. The pharmaceutical industry replaced it with antihistamine tablets priced at 20 times the cost. The nettle still grows free along every ditch and creek bank in America. Number 21. Hawthorn berry. In farmhouses across the American Midwest and throughout Appalachia, Grandmothers kept dried hawthorn berries in a tin in the kitchen specifically for one purpose. When an elderly relative's ankles began to swell, when climbing the porch steps required stopping halfway, when the heart seemed to flutter at rest, the hawthorn tea came out. They brewed it daily and gave it without ceremony, like handing over an aspirin. The Spice Trial, a large randomized controlled study published in the European Journal of Heart Failure, enrolled 2,681 patients with confirmed heart failure and found hawthorn extract significantly improved exercise tolerance and reduced symptoms compared to placebo. Germany's Commission E, the federal body that evaluates herbal medicines, officially approves hawthorn extract for early-stage heart failure. It is a regulated prescription medicine in Germany. In America, it sits on the shelf between vitamin C and fish oil, with no label allowed to tell you what the clinical trial found. Number 20. Mullein. That tall, velvet-leafed plant that shot up 6 feet along every roadside and abandoned field was the grandmother's answer to every chest cold that settled in from November through March. She dried the large, soft leaves in late summer, stored them in paper bags hung in the pantry, and when a cough went deep and rattling, she crumbled the leaves into a mug and poured boiling water over them. The tea was strained through muslin because the fine hairs on the leaf would irritate the throat if you skipped that step. Every grandmother who used it knew that. Then she sweetened the tea with honey and gave it in cups through the day. Pharmacological research has since identified verbascoside in mullein, an anti-inflammatory compound that suppresses the inflammatory enzymes in respiratory tissue, and explains exactly why that tea worked when nothing else would. Germany's Commission E has officially approved mullein flower preparations for the treatment of respiratory catarrh. The plant grows free along every country road in America. Number 19. Calendula. Grandmothers who kept a kitchen garden treated calendula as a supply, not a flower. They grew it specifically to make the infused oil that sat on a shelf in the kitchen, and that oil served as the household's first response to every cut, burn, blister, and skin infection that came through the door. Dried petals were packed into a jar of olive oil, sealed, and left in a warm window for 4 weeks. The resulting oil kept for months and treated everything from a child's scraped knee to an infected hangnail to the cracked and bleeding skin that came from outdoor farm work through every season. During the Civil War, field surgeons who ran out of antiseptics fell back on calendula poultices for open wounds. During World War I, the British Medical Journal published accounts of military surgeons using calendula preparations when pharmaceutical supplies were exhausted. A clinical trial in 2009, published in the Journal of Wound Care, found that calendula ointment significantly outperformed petroleum jelly for acute wound healing. Your grandmother was ahead of that trial by several generations. Number 18. Valerian. The root smelled like old socks, and the grandmother who kept it in a dark bottle on the shelf knew exactly who in the community would need it, for the nights that would not end, for the anxiety that nothing else would touch, for the man who came back from the war different and who could not sleep without startling at sounds that other people did not hear. She soaked the root in whiskey for several weeks, strained it carefully, and kept it ready. A teaspoon in warm water before bed. American physicians prescribed valerian root as a sedative from 1820 until 1942. 122 years of official recognition in the United States Pharmacopoeia. It was removed not because it failed clinical evaluation, but because patentable synthetic sedatives had arrived, and the economics of official medicine had shifted. A 2021 systematic review in Sleep Medicine Reviews analyzed 60 studies and found consistent evidence that valerian reduces the time it takes to fall asleep and improves sleep quality. The prescription drugs that replaced it carry FDA black box warnings for dependency, withdrawal seizures, and next-day cognitive impairment. Here is where this list asks something of you. Every remedy you have heard so far was dismissed at some point in the last 100 years as old wives' tales, the unsophisticated superstitions of people who did not have access to real medicine. What the clinical literature published in the last 30 years has done, quietly and without much announcement, is confirm that a significant percentage of what your grandmother knew was pharmacologically accurate. She did not have the vocabulary for it. She had the results. And in communities where the nearest doctor was a day's travel away and a prescription cost more than a week's food, results were the only evaluation that mattered. The plants grew, they worked, the knowledge passed forward. 17 more. Number 17, echinacea. Between 1880 and 1930, echinacea was the single most prescribed medicine in the United States. Not a supplement sitting on a shelf with a vague wellness claim, but a prescription written by licensed physicians, dispensed by pharmacists, and recognized by the formal eclectic school of American medicine that treated millions of patients before being systematically replaced by pharmaceutical-backed medicine in the 1930s. Your grandmother kept it as a tincture, dark and bitter, and a dropper of it went into water at the very first scratch in the throat, before anything else. It was removed from official American medicine not because clinical observation found it wanting, but because it could not be patented. A 2015 meta-analysis reviewing 24 randomized controlled trials found echinacea preparations reduced cold incidence by 58% and cut duration by nearly 1.5 days. The study is sitting in the medical literature right now. Most Americans have never been told. Number 16, ginger. Your grandmother did not reach for ginger because she had read a study. She reached for it because her grandmother had reached for it, and hers before that. And 5,000 years of observation had been consistent enough to keep the knowledge moving forward through generations. She grated it fresh into hot water with honey for nausea, for the stomach upset that came with fever, for the morning sickness that made the first months of pregnancy something to survive. Gingerol and Shogal, the primary active compounds, work directly on the gastrointestinal tract and on the central nervous system receptors that regulate nausea. A 2014 meta-analysis in Nutrition Journal reviewed 12 randomized controlled trials and found ginger significantly more effective than placebo for pregnancy nausea, comparable in efficacy to vitamin B6, which is the standard pharmaceutical recommendation. A 2012 Cochrane review found it comparable to prescription antiemetics for post-operative nausea. The ginger ale your grandmother gave you when you were sick contained actual ginger. The commercial version sold today does not. Number 15, garlic. Every grandmother who kept a kitchen garden kept garlic, and those who understood it as medicine kept it in two places, the kitchen and the medicine shelf. She rubbed a cut clove on infected skin. She gave it raw and chopped, mixed into food or taken on a spoon at the first sign of a chest infection. She pressed garlic poultices onto wounds that were starting to streak red, which was the visible sign that infection was moving toward the blood and things were getting serious. During World War I, British military surgeons applied raw garlic to infected wounds when pharmaceutical antiseptics ran out at the front. Russian military surgeons called it Russian penicillin. Both were doing this 17 years before Alexander Fleming identified penicillin in his London laboratory in 1928. A 2001 study in Microbes and Infection confirmed that allicin, the compound released when garlic is crushed, directly inhibited MRSA, the antibiotic-resistant pathogen that now kills tens of thousands of Americans annually. Your grandmother's kitchen wall was a pharmacy. Number 14, meadowsweet. Almost no one alive today knows that aspirin was named after this plant. The pharmaceutical name, acetyl salicylic acid, aspirin, was derived from Spirea ulmaria. That was the old botanical classification for meadowsweet. Bayer's chemists synthesized their compound directly from the plant's salicylate chemistry, and they acknowledged the source in the name they chose for the drug. Your grandmother brewed meadowsweet into a gentle tea for fever, headache, and the inflammatory pain that came with age and injury. The critical difference between the plant and the pill is that meadowsweet contains tannins and mucilaginous compounds that protect the stomach lining from irritation. Pharmaceutical aspirin, which isolates the salicylate without the surrounding plant chemistry, causes gastric bleeding with regular long-term use, a risk that carries an FDA warning. The original preparation was safer than the copy. Your grandmother was working with a more complete version of the medicine than the one that eventually replaced it. Number 13. Slippery elm, listed in the United States Pharmacopoeia from 1820 through 1960. 140 years of official pharmaceutical recognition. The inner bark of the slippery elm tree, dried and powdered, forms a thick, mucilaginous gel when mixed with water that physically coats the entire lining of the esophagus, stomach, and intestines. It is not a chemical reaction. It is a physical mechanism, a smooth, soothing layer that sits over inflamed tissue and allows it to heal underneath. Grandmothers mixed it with hot water and honey into a thin porridge and gave it to anyone with a stomach complaint, from infants with colic to elderly relatives with ulcers. The FDA classified slippery elm as a Category 1, safe and effective over-the-counter demulcent in 1986, one of the few herbal preparations to receive an official FDA efficacy designation. A study in 2002 confirmed it significantly improved irritable bowel symptoms. It still works. Number 12. Red raspberry leaf. For over 200 years, midwives across rural America gave pregnant women red raspberry leaf tea in the final weeks before delivery. The instruction was consistent and specific. Brew it strong, drink it daily, and the labor would go faster and cleaner. It was not a comfort drink. It was a clinical preparation with a purpose. The plant contains fragarine, a compound that tones the smooth muscle of the uterine wall. Midwives who observed that women who drank the tea regularly had shorter second stages of labor and fewer instrument deliveries were not imagining outcomes. A 1999 randomized controlled trial in the Journal of Midwifery and Women's Health studied 192 mothers and found raspberry leaf supplementation reduced the duration of the second stage of labor and lowered forceps delivery rates, with no adverse effects documented. When hospital births replaced home births and obstetricians replaced midwives, the tea was not included in the handover. The knowledge simply did not transfer. It disappeared. Number 11. Golden seal. The demand for golden seal across the 19th century American frontier was so relentless that the plant was commercially depleted in many regions within 2 generations of settlers discovering it. Demand destroyed supply because the results were consistent and everyone knew it. Cherokee healers had used it for centuries, for skin infections, eye inflammation, digestive complaints, and the respiratory infections that swept through communities in winter. Settlers adopted it within the first generations of contact, and it became so embedded in American medicine that Civil War surgeons on both sides requisitioned it by name for field hospitals. The active compound berberine has been through extensive modern clinical research. A 2015 meta-analysis of 27 randomized controlled trials found berberine comparable to metformin, the most prescribed diabetes drug in the world for blood glucose reduction. A 2014 study confirmed direct antimicrobial activity against MRSA. 200 years of evidence preceded those trials. Number 10. Turmeric. Grandmothers in communities with South Asian roots understood turmeric as medicine before the rest of America understood it as a spice. Golden milk, made from turmeric, black pepper, and warm whole milk, was the grandmother preparation for every inflammation, every cold, every injury that left tissue swollen and painful. The black pepper was not an accident. Piperine in black pepper increases the bioavailability of curcumin turmeric's primary active compound by 2,000%. Your grandmother did not know what bioavailability meant. She knew the recipe had to include both. A 2009 clinical trial in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine compared curcumin directly to ibuprofen for knee osteoarthritis pain. The curcumin group showed equivalent pain reduction with significantly fewer gastrointestinal side effects. Ibuprofen carries FDA warnings for stomach bleeding and cardiovascular risk with regular use. Turmeric does not. The grandmother who put both turmeric and pepper in the pot was practicing precision pharmacology. Here's the number that makes the rest of this list make sense. According to the World Health Organization, 80% of the world's population still relies on herbal remedies as primary health care. Not as a backup when conventional medicine fails, as the first choice. The communities that maintained this knowledge through the 20th century, in the mountains, in the rural South, in immigrant households that carried their medical traditions across oceans, were not behind. They were holding on to something that the rest of the country had been persuaded to discard. The persuasion came from industries that needed the discarding to happen in order to sell the replacement. The women who kept these plants in coffee tins on the windowsill were more correct than the advertising that told their grandchildren to throw those tins away. 9 more. Number 9, chamomile. The tea is so ordinary, so associated with bedtime and comfort and the mildest possible intervention that most people have completely stopped thinking of it as medicine. That is exactly what happened. The familiarity buried the pharmacology. The active compounds in chamomile, apigenin, and related flavonoids bind to GABA receptors in the brain. GABA receptors are the same receptors targeted by Valium and Xanax. The mechanism is the same. The dependency risk is not. A 2009 randomized controlled trial in the Journal of Clinical Psychopharmacology found chamomile extract significantly superior to placebo for generalized anxiety disorder. A 2016 follow-up long-term study found chamomile also reduced the rate of anxiety relapse after treatment ended. Benzodiazepines, the pharmaceutical class that replaced botanical sedatives, carry FDA black box warnings for dependency and withdrawal seizures. Your grandmother offered chamomile. She was not being gentle. She was being clinically accurate. Number 8, lemon balm. Grandmother grew it between the roses because it spread like a weed if you let it, and it smelled unmistakably of lemon when the leaves were crushed. She brewed it into tea for whoever in the household was wound too tight. The child who could not settle at night. The woman who could not stop turning things over in her mind. The man whose hands shook after a long stretch of hard news. She combined it with valerian when cases needed more. Lemon balm contains rosmarinic acid, which inhibits the enzyme that breaks down GABA in the brain, meaning it increases the brain's primary calming neurotransmitter, not by mimicking it, but by preventing its breakdown. A 2014 study in the journal Nutrients found lemon balm significantly reduced anxiety and insomnia within 15 days. A 2003 double-blind crossover study in psychosomatic medicine found a single dose improved mood and reduced anxiety in a dose-dependent manner. She grew it because it worked. The literature agreed with her. Number 7, wild cherry bark. The cough syrup your grandmother made in winter was not a recipe she invented. It was an inheritance that had moved forward through generations of American families since the colonial period. Wild cherry trees grew along creek bottoms and forest edges everywhere. In late autumn, when the medicinal compounds in the bark were at their peak, mothers stripped the inner bark, dried it, and simmered it slowly with raw honey into a dark, thick syrup that tasted good enough that children did not refuse it. Wild cherry bark was listed in the United States Pharmacopoeia from 1820 through 1970, 150 years of official pharmaceutical recognition. The compound prunasin converts during digestion to benzaldehyde, which directly suppresses the cough reflex at the brainstem level. It is the same mechanism used in codeine-based prescription cough suppressants. The compound was later isolated, synthesized, patented, and sold back to American families at many times the cost of the bark. Your grandmother's recipe contained the same active chemistry. She made it from a tree. Number 6. Passion flower. Cherokee people called it okoi and used it as a sedative. Grandmothers who learned it from mountain healers kept it for what they called high-strung nerves, the anxiety that would not sit still, the sleep that would not come, the exhaustion that rest did not fix. They brewed the dried aerial parts, leaves, stems, and tendrils into a tea given in the evening. For cases that required more, they combined it with valerian and lemon balm. That layered preparation was the grandmother's version of what pharmaceutical medicine would spend the next century trying to replicate in synthetic form. A 2011 randomized controlled trial in phytotherapy research found passion flower extract comparable to oxazepam, a prescription benzodiazepine, for the treatment of generalized anxiety disorder, with significantly fewer side effects and specifically no impairment of job performance the following day. The grandmother's nerve tea had a better side effect profile than the prescription drug it preceded by generations. Number 5. St. John's wort. The yellow wildflower that bloomed in open fields of early summer was the grandmother's remedy for low mood, for the melancholy that followed loss, for the person in the household who had stopped eating well and could not find their way through. She kept a tincture in a dark bottle and gave it quietly to neighbors and family members who were not quite right, without making anything of it. In Germany, St. John's wort is the most prescribed antidepressant, not a supplement. It is a prescription medicine covered by national health insurance and dispensed by licensed pharmacists. A 2008 Cochrane systematic review analyzed 29 clinical trials involving 5,489 patients and concluded that St. John's wort was significantly superior to placebo for major depression, comparable in efficacy to standard antidepressants, and produced significantly fewer adverse effects. In America, the FDA will not permit any health claim on the label. The pharmaceutical industry did not need to ban it. It simply needed to ensure that most Americans never learned what nearly 5,500 patients in published clinical trials already confirmed. Number 4. Feverfew. The grandmother who kept feverfew gave it as a daily preventive, not an acute remedy, a distinction that required real clinical understanding of how recurring headaches work. 2 or 3 fresh leaves eaten every day, or a strong tea of the dried herb taken regularly, reduced the frequency and severity of the headaches that appeared on a predictable schedule and left a person unable to function for hours at a time. Feverfew contains parthenolide, which inhibits platelet aggregation, and the release of serotonin from platelets, both directly involved in migraine pathophysiology. A 1988 randomized controlled trial published in The Lancet confirmed that feverfew supplementation significantly reduced migraine frequency compared to placebo. A 2004 Cochrane review confirmed the finding across multiple trials. The grandmother who told her granddaughter to eat a few feverfew leaves every morning had arrived at the preventive protocol that The Lancet confirmed. She arrived through observation. The Lancet arrived through methodology. The recommendation was the same. Number 3. Elderflower. The same tree that gave the berries also gave the flowers, and grandmothers who knew the plant used both for different purposes. The berries built immunity and fought the virus. The flowers managed the fever that came when the virus won anyway. The protocol was specific and deliberate. Brew elderflower tea hot and strong. Put the patient to bed under heavy quilts, give the tea through the night, and encourage sweating. The fever broke by morning in a pronounced sweat that soaked the bedding and left the patient cooling and exhausted. Elderflower contains flavonoids and phenolic acids that promote diaphoresis, the medical term for induced perspiration, which assists the body's natural fever-breaking mechanism. The grandmother was working with the fever, helping the body complete what it was already attempting. A 2021 review in Phytotherapy Research confirmed elderflower's diaphoretic, anti-inflammatory, and antiviral properties. She was practicing a more rational approach to fever management than simply suppressing it with a drug. Number 2, American ginseng. Mountain families in Appalachia guarded the locations of good ginseng stands the way they guarded land deeds. Ginseng hunting, called seng hunting in the mountains, was one of the primary cash economies of the frontier because Chinese merchants paid premium prices for the dried root through trading posts across the region. Inside the communities, families used ginseng root as a tonic for whoever was running out of reserve. The elderly relative who was declining faster than their years should allow, the man doing the most brutal physical work of the season, the woman recovering from childbirth who could not regain her strength. A 2010 randomized controlled trial in the Journal of the National Cancer Institute found ginseng supplementation significantly reduced cancer-related fatigue in 364 patients. A 2013 review in PLOS-1 analyzed 155 studies and documented significant positive effects on cognitive function, mood, and physical performance. The mountain families who drank ginseng tea were providing one of the most comprehensively studied natural adaptogens in the pharmacological literature. They were also sitting on a fortune they could dig from the ground. Number 1. Comfrey. The mountain name was Knitbone, and the name told the entire story. When a man broke a rib being kicked by a mule, when a child fractured a wrist falling from a tree, when a woman turned an ankle on an icy creek crossing, the grandmother mashed the large, hairy comfrey leaves into a paste, mixed it with lard or beeswax, spread it thick over the injury, and wrapped it tight with cloth strips. Changed daily. Left in place for as long as it took. Families who lived miles from any doctor or bone setter had nothing else, and what they had worked. The allantoin in comfrey stimulates cell proliferation and accelerates tissue regeneration. It is the same compound used in pharmaceutical wound healing preparations today. A randomized controlled trial from 2004, published in Phytomedicine, found comfrey root extract significantly superior to diclofenac gel, a standard pharmaceutical anti-inflammatory for ankle sprains. The grandmother who mashed comfrey leaves onto a broken bone was ahead of the pharmaceutical comparison. She just called it Knitbone and got on with the work. 25 remedies, not one of them invented by the women who used them. All of them inherited, tested against reality, refined across generations, and passed forward because they worked. The clinical literature has spent the last 30 years quietly confirming what your great-grandmother already knew. Walk outside this week. Chances are 3 plants on this list are growing within 100 yards of where you are right now. Plantain in the yard, yarrow along the road, elderberries along the creek. Your great-grandmother did not need a pharmacy. She needed her eyes open and the knowledge that someone before her took the time to pass down. Subscribe to Forgotten American Ways, because this knowledge is not gone yet. It is just one generation away from silence.